Am I dead already? Such were the inaugural words that escaped the young man's lips mere moments ago. Just prior, he had thrown himself into the path of a careening truck, a desperate bid to shield a small girl. Yet now, he found himself enveloped in a celestial realm, standing before a winged woman and a serene dog. No, the ethereal figure calmly responded, time itself is pausing in this very instant. But your death, Jingyuji Joe, is imminent. At 21 years old, Joe had recently marked his graduation from Japan's National Defense Academy. He vividly recalled the jarring image of a dump truck, oblivious to the traffic signal, and his instinctive lunge to save the child. He truly believed he had passed on, ascended to some kind of heaven. But, as the winged figure gently explained, his reality was a little different. She elucidated that she had indeed halted time, conversing directly with his very soul. Noticing his profound astonishment, she introduced herself as what people in his world would refer to as a god, one of the overseers of time and space. Her revelation was a profound shock to the young soldier. She further explained that she had dispatched one of her retainers, cloaked in the form of a dog, to his world to broaden their understanding of it. This retainer, in fact, was meant to be the girl's guardian. However, a momentary lapse, a distraction by a fluttering butterfly, had caused the canine to lose its sense of earthly security and wander into the street with the girl in tow. This, she admitted, was the direct cause of Joe's involvement in the harrowing accident. She bowed deeply, a gesture of profound apology. Observing his continued stillness, frozen in place, she remarked that such shock was a natural reaction upon learning one's demise was due to a divine misstep. In truth, Joe's ingrained military discipline had taken over. Recognizing the goddess as a superior being, indeed a superior to all of mankind, he maintained an unwavering posture of perfect stillness throughout her explanation. After another earnest apology, her canine companion nudged her, a subtle reminder of their diminishing window of time. Extending her hands, she offered the young man a remarkable proposition as recompense. "Jingyuji-sama," she intoned, "will you allow me to reincarnate you?" A miniature globe and a human figure shimmered into existence within her palms. She offered to perfectly replicate his body, soul, and memories, then transfer them to an entirely different world under her stewardship. Yet, she cautioned, time was critically short. Once the flow of time resumed, she would no longer be able to copy his living essence, and she could not delay a moment longer. Unwilling for him to meet such an abrupt end, she implored him to accept her offer. Taking a deep, measured breath, Joe inquired if reincarnation within his original world was utterly impossible. The goddess, however, expressed her regret, explaining that once death was confirmed in a specific world, it could not be reversed within that same reality. Such an act lay far beyond her authority. Acknowledging this, he posed his next query, asking if there would be any means for him to communicate with his friends or family after his reincarnation. This, too, she regretfully stated, was impossible. He would be journeying to an entirely distinct world, never to encounter anyone from his previous life again. He swallowed hard, his mind briefly flashing to images of his family, before accepting her reply and posing his final question. He needed to know if the girl he had sacrificed himself for would indeed survive. Surprised by the selfless nature of his concern, the goddess calmly confirmed that, thanks to his intervention, the child would escape entirely unscathed. A faint smile touched Joe's lips. Offering her a crisp military salute, he assented to being reincarnated into this other world. She thanked him for his agreement, and to ensure his well-being in this new existence, she bestowed upon him her blessing and a new, extraordinary power, urging him to recall her words before his transfer. In a blink, Jingyuji found himself standing on a cobbled road amidst ancient ruins, a shrine dedicated to the very goddess who had sent him there rising before him. He stared at his own hands, surprised. He felt no different than before, wondering if this was truly a copy of his body or merely a transportation of his original self. Surveying the surrounding forest, a prickle of intuition suggested he was being watched from the dense brush. Following a path that cut through the woods, he hoped it would lead to a village. The goddess's parting words resonated in his mind. He would need equipment to traverse this wild forest. Extending his hands, a Type 89 5.56mm assault rifle materialized before him, solid and cold. The goddess, it turned out, had granted him the inventory ability, an astonishing power allowing him to store and retrieve items at will without any apparent limit. She had also provided him with something he was destined to receive before his untimely demise: the complete Japanese ground self-defense force equipment, intended for him after his official post assignment. He donned his combat fatigues, meticulously laced his boots, fixed his bayonet, and settled his helmet onto his head. Fully equipped with his standard JSDF gear, he offered a silent salute to the goddess, a gesture of gratitude as he prepared to explore the possibilities of this new life she had given him. Rifle at the ready, he began his walk down the cobbled road, stepping into this unfamiliar world. Images from his past life flickered through his mind, recalling a time he was asked why he wished to join the self-defense forces. His reply had been straightforward: "I wanted to be someone who protects people's lives, someone who protects the innocent." He had truly believed that if he became a self-defense official, armed with the necessary power, he could save more lives. This conviction had propelled him through all his rigorous training. He felt a quiet satisfaction in having been able to act swiftly and save a life in his original world, holding no regrets about how he had died. Yet, it still felt incomplete. Wherever he might be, no matter how many times he might be reborn, he knew he could still protect someone. Joe's contemplation was shattered as a shaft of light pierced through the trees ahead, signaling the forest's edge. At that precise moment, a piercing scream reached his ears, and he instinctively rushed towards it. In a small clearing, a young girl with distinctive bunny ears stared in abject horror. A colossal, monstrous creature towered over her, its massive jaws tearing into the fresh carcass of a horse it had just slaughtered. Frozen in terror, the girl prayed the beast wouldn't turn its attention her way. Her fleeing companions, spotting her, urgently implored the girl, named Belle, to get up. But a trickle of blood from a scrape on her knee alerted the monster to her presence. It lumbered closer, sniffing and tasting the air around her before moving to seize her. Her companion feared he wouldn't reach her in time. Belle closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Then, with a sickening thud-thud, two of the creature's massive fingers were cleanly blown off. Belle and the swordsman watching were utterly stunned. The monster barely registered its severed digits before another shot thudded into its head, felling it decisively. The startled bunny girl turned to see Jingyuji crouched beside her, asking if she was all right and extending a hand. But before she could take it, she cried out, alerting him. The monster was rising again. Reacting instantly, the soldier gripped his rifle with both hands and plunged his bayonet through the monster's eye. Staring at this giant creature, attacking people, he wondered what kind of world this truly was. But it made no difference. He would protect this girl, no matter what. He offered her a reassuring smile before turning back to face the wounded beast. Realizing a few bullets weren't enough to bring it down, he flicked the fire selector to full auto. Raising the rifle to his face, a steely determination set in, intent on discovering the true extent of his capabilities in this new world. The soldier unleashed a barrage of bullets at the monster, finally putting it down for good. Looking up, he saw two more creatures emerging from the woods. The monster, it seemed, had friends. Don't underestimate the Type 89, he thought, as he raised his assault rifle and fired at the new enemies. It worked. The first of the new monsters crumpled under the full auto fire aimed at its head, leaving just one more. This remaining beast, however, proved faster, leaping instantly to club him from above. In a flash of horror, Jingyuji realized he wouldn't have time to aim. But then, the monster was simultaneously struck by an arrow in its side and a longsword across its neck. Turning, Jingyuji saw Belle's companions covering him, the swordsman urging him to repeat his strike. I can use Japanese, the soldier thought, recalling the goddess's explanation that he could communicate normally. Aiming his weapon straight at the monster's head, he squeezed the trigger and emptied his magazine into it. With the final creature slain and the immediate threat suppressed, he lowered his rifle, a grim assessment forming in his mind. This is one hell of a world. Dabbing a speck of blood from his cheek, he turned to see the woman beside him stammering out her thanks. He had been so engrossed in the fight that only now did he truly register her distinctive bunny ears. Jingyuji was then clapped on the back by the swordsman, who, amazed by what he perceived as explosive magic, continued to pat him enthusiastically. From within a nearby carriage, a voice addressed the swordsman as Gilbert, inquiring if it was safe to emerge. The swordsman confirmed it, telling the man named Antonio he could now step out. Carefully disembarking, the gentleman hailed Jingyuji as an incredible magician for single-handedly dispatching so many ogres. He profusely thanked the soldier for saving his life and introduced himself as a merchant. Jingyuji Joe, realizing this world was indeed akin to a fantasy realm, introduced himself. Antonio found Jingyuji an unusual name, especially when Joe clarified it was his family name and Joe his given name. The merchant and his entourage immediately dropped to their knees, Antonio asking if he was a nobleman from another country, apologizing for his perceived rudeness. Recognizing his peculiar situation, the soldier instructed the merchant to rise, stating he was probably not a noble and feigning amnesia to navigate this predicament, claiming he couldn't remember exactly who he was. Concerned, Gilbert inquired if he had journeyed through the Lost Forest north of their current location. When Joe energetically confirmed this, the swordsman declared Joe a lost one, eliciting pity from everyone present. They concluded this must be the reason for his memory loss, surprised he had emerged from the forest at all, and accepting his story, deduced the man must be in distress. They kindly invited him to accompany them to the city. Having saved his life, Antonio intended to properly reward Joe upon their return. With this settled, they resumed their journey. Along the way, Antonio elucidated the world in great detail. It was, just as Joe had surmised, a fantasy world mirroring those found in games and novels, complete with magic, demons, and a culture and social structure reminiscent of medieval Europe from Joe's previous world. This included the existence of walled commercial city-states as bustling economic hubs, with their residents belonging to associations known as guilds. The free trading city of Sveni, for instance, was governed by a standing assembly comprising representatives from the church, the garrison, and the production, merchant, and adventurers guilds. Other guilds, like the Mercenary Guild, existed but held no voice in the assembly. This particular party had been formed by Gilbert and Hannah from the Adventurers Guild, tasked with escorting Antonio, a member of the Merchants Guild, as he peddled his wares. Antonio considered their perilous situation a blessing in disguise. Despite the loss of a horse and a carriage, they had managed to collect 3 ogre carcasses. Joe was surprised to learn the ogre he had killed was valuable in this world, where demons were systematically dismantled and utilized as materials. Ogre hides, for instance, were fashioned into armor. Given the difficulty in defeating more powerful demons, a beast as formidable as an ogre could command a considerable price. Antonio was eager to purchase all 3 creatures from him. The adventurers were astonished, as even a single ogre could provide sustenance for an entire year. Just like that, Joe found himself unexpectedly wealthy. The carriage jolted on the uneven road, causing Belle to lean into Joe and her bunny ears to brush against him. She flushed with embarrassment, but the soldier was more surprised by the fact that her ears were, indeed, real. Antonio chuckled, noting that Joe seemed to have forgotten about beastmen as well. He then prompted the girl to introduce herself. Thanking him, Belle formally introduced herself as the merchant's servant, blushing as she greeted him. Her attire and distinct ears immediately reminded the young man of the bunny-eared maids one might encounter in the cafes of Akihabara. Surprised to see a real one here, and finding her undeniably cute, his mind raced, yet he managed to compose himself and greet her politely. Curious, Antonio wondered if he might ask Joe something, based on what little he could recall. He then observed Joe's unusual attire, particularly intrigued by his uniform's pattern and the fabric it was made of. The soldier understood why a merchant like Antonio would be interested in his equipment, but he was acutely aware that people from this world would be utterly incapable of comprehending any of it. Unwilling to attract too much suspicion, he once again leaned on his fabricated amnesia. He slowly recalled the pattern was called camouflage, excusing himself on account of his foggy memory, and also provided some details about his helmet, further fascinating the merchant. Antonio then asked to hold his rifle, believing it to be a magical wand. Following proper regulations, Joe removed and sheathed the bayonet, unloaded the magazine, and locked the charging handle in the open position, before handing over the weapon, hoping for minimal further questions. The merchant was astonished to discover the supposed wand was made of iron, especially given its weight, and declared it the most elaborate wand he had ever seen, pondering what he might have to do to acquire such an item. Joe grew nervous, but the merchant returned his weapon, apologizing for his rudeness in asking to borrow such a precious wand. Slapping his own forehead, he apologized again for his habit of becoming overly excited when encountering something unusual, something he had never found in the market. As the slightly embarrassed man apologized once more, Joe noted to himself that Antonio seemed like a nice man, wondering if he was what they called a charmer. In the end, Antonio's questions continued long into the night. The group eventually stopped to set up camp in a clearing. Instructing Belle to prepare a meal, Antonio placed a satchel adorned with strange symbols atop a makeshift table and proceeded to pull out an impossible quantity of foodstuffs, supplies, and tableware. Joe was surprised by this display and deduced that inventory seemed to be a common magical tool in this world, an expensive item usable only by its owner, and an absolute necessity for travelers. This made him consider that it wouldn't be unusual for him to retrieve items from his own backpack inventory. Joe felt as if he were in paradise, with the maid of his dreams serving him delicious food, sitting blushing by his side. He felt grateful to be invited to dine with his new travel companions, despite their recent encounter. He concluded he couldn't be the only one to benefit from this good fortune. Addressing Antonio, he offered to share some of his portable food supply. Thanks to the goddess, he could draw food from his inventory once a day, as she had blessed it with a replenishment ability. This power daily restocked his belongings from his previous life, though it did not apply to items from this new world. Thanks to this, he could replenish his ammunition daily, and of course, food was included. Antonio and Gilbert looked on in awe and disbelief as he pulled several cans of food, constituting a Type 1 combat ration, from his satchel. He explained there was food inside the containers, demonstrating the use of a can opener, and then boiled the cans for 30 minutes to heat the contents. Once prepared, he opened the cans, revealing 3 rice dishes, 3 side dishes, and 3 cans of takwan pickled radish. He then instructed his amazed companions to share and enjoy the meal. They stared at the dishes with surprise, having apparently never seen rice or takwan before. The 3 then took their first bites, pausing in awe at how delicious it was. True to his military training, Joe finished his meal in no time. Watching his companions savor his canned food, he smiled with satisfaction. Feeling utterly exhausted from his first day in this new world, he gazed up at the starry sky. Antonio was shocked by the canned goods' 2-year shelf life, excitedly asking Jingyuji to explain how they were made. Their conversation was cut short by their arrival at the free trading city of Sveni. The bastion fort town was encircled by thick walls, punctuated by a few heavily guarded gates. Wagons were neatly lined up for inspection and ID checks before entry. Joe, lacking any official identification, wondered if he would be turned away. When their turn arrived, Gilbert recognized the inspecting officer and greeted her warmly as Amanda. After some playful banter, he declared their cargo to be 3 ogres, surprising the customs officer. Gilbert chuckled, observing her reaction when she learned Joe had taken down all 3 by himself. With the cargo inspection complete, they proceeded to confirm their identities. Amanda produced a dog tag from around Gilbert's neck, checked it against her ledger, and verified the adventurer's identity before moving on to Antonio. Taking a chance, Joe pulled out his own JSDF dog tag. Much to his surprise, the woman confirmed his identity, welcoming him into the city. Once inside, Gilbert noted Joe was a metal ranker, a fact that no longer surprised him after witnessing Joe's explosive magic. When the soldier inquired about it, his partner attributed his questions to his amnesia and explained that guild members were ranked according to their abilities and achievements, with metal IDs granted above a certain rank. Learning about the different ranks and their army equivalents, Joe realized that both Gilbert and Antonio were, in fact, his superiors. The goddess, as part of her blessing, had promoted him 2 ranks, from first sergeant to second lieutenant. The adventurers then parted ways, heading to the Adventurers Guild to report the completion of their request, while Joe accompanied Antonio to the Merchants Guild Hall. Inside the guild hall, they were greeted by 2 beautiful women. The merchant introduced Joe as his guest, and the women politely asked him to refrain from using his weapons within the building. Joe's mind, however, was far more captivated by their beauty. Having barely seen a woman during his time at the academy, their presence caused his immunity to women to swiftly dissipate. After watching Belle depart to prepare some tea, the soldier was led to Antonio's office and invited to sit. Observing the grandeur of the room, he deduced the merchant must be an important figure. Soon, a knock came at the door. A beautiful elven woman entered, expressing concern for Antonio. He then explained that his life had indeed been threatened, but Jingyuji had managed to kill all 3 ogres. The elf scanned the strange man intently, seemingly wary of him, yet he found her judging gaze oddly stimulating. He was lost in these thoughts when Belle entered the room with the tea. The elf immediately rushed to embrace Belle, causing his woman affinity meter to max out. The elf then asked Belle if this was the man who had saved her, and upon confirmation, she turned to Joe, apologizing for the late introduction. She revealed herself to be Eldra, vice president of the Sveni Merchants Guild, and Antonio, its president. Joe realized, to his surprise, how powerful the merchant truly was, equating his rank to that of a general, and believing Antonio had deliberately kept quiet about it. With the introductions complete, Antonio opened a drawer and retrieved an identification board, similar to the one Amanda had used at the gate. He used it to try and ascertain where Joe's dog tag was registered. The board revealed it was registered in the country of Azuma, which Eldra explained was an island nation located out at sea, far east of the continent where they currently resided. Jingyuji's appearance, combined with the mention of Azuma, reminded her of the hero Kojiro from the last Great War, 80 years prior. In that dire time, the Demon King and his army of demons had launched a war of aggression against the other races of the continent. It was then that the hero Kojiro appeared, aiding the outnumbered resistance forces in defeating the Demon King's army, using otherworldly military gear to do so. After the Great War, he embarked on a journey to find his home and subsequently founded the country of Azuma. Eldra also pointed out that, from what she had heard, he bore a striking resemblance to Jingyuji. Joe inwardly admitted that all this reminded him of Japan, and that if this had happened 80 years ago, the hero might have been plucked directly from the Second World War. In the end, Antonio couldn't find any further information about Joe. Eldra, however, believed someone in the elven village might possess more knowledge, promising to contact them and investigate further, to which Joe eagerly agreed, wanting to learn more about this hero and Azuma. Belle then left on an errand, and Antonio invited Joe for lunch. Arriving at a fancy restaurant, the merchant was treated with reverence, and he and his party were escorted to a back room for a more private meal. Antonio offered the soldier some alcohol, which Joe immediately accepted, as per his training. They toasted to the safe return of their travels when a booming voice called out for Antonio. Suddenly, the door burst open, revealing an elderly dwarf. He demanded to know why Antonio had sent Belle to summon him in the middle of his work. Joe confirmed this world also harbored dwarves, as well as elves, as the stocky creature studied him, asking his identity. Joe greeted the dwarf formally, extending his hand, but the dwarf angrily slapped it away, stating he disliked nobles. "Dwarves are cranky," was the only thought that crossed the soldier's mind in response to his reaction. Antonio laughed, greeting him as Tendar, and proceeded to explain Jingyuji's story. "Dwarves are honest, Joe thought, as Tendar apologized for his behavior upon learning Joe was a lost one. The reason Antonio had summoned the master of the Guild of Production was to show him the canned goods the soldier had shared. Joe handed the dwarf a sample as the merchant highlighted its long shelf life and inquired if he could replicate such a product. Accepting the challenge, the cranky dwarf snatched the can from Joe's hand, and Antonio ordered more wine. By the time the food arrived, Joe had explained the basic process of canning to Tendar and its effect in reducing bacterial growth on preserved food. Not being an expert on the subject, he couldn't answer the dwarf's detailed inquiries about removing air from the cans. Slamming his now empty bottle against the table, the dwarf attributed this gap in Joe's knowledge to his lost memory, noting he must have endured significant hardship, pointing at him with his beefy hand and urging him to eat. "Dwarves are kind," was all he could think of at this energetic display of empathy. Cutting up his food, Jingyuji proceeded to taste his first non-preserved meat since his reincarnation. He paused to savor it, recognizing the taste of beef and relishing the rich meat and vegetable flavors in the sauce. Staring at his food and the can before him, a realization struck him, and his companions, each for his own reason, seemed to think alike. The three men all pondered the possibility of canning steak. Having finished his steak, as well as a couple more bottles of wine, Tendar wiped his mouth and rose, ready to return to his forge, while Antonio suggested they meet later at the Merchants' Guild Hall to discuss their canned goods endeavor. "He eats faster than me," thought the startled soldier as the dwarf pushed back his chair. But his attention quickly shifted when he saw Tendar pull a watch from his robes. Noting his knowledge of the artifact, Eldra concluded he was indeed related to Kajiro, revealing the timepiece had been handed down by the hero after the war. This device had allowed elves and dwarves, whose sense of time differed from other races, to reliably collaborate with them, with Tendar having had a copy made during that period. Kajiro had also standardized the units of weight and length in the world and had been instrumental in changing the course of the war, not merely through individual strength, but also through a fundamental shift in tactics. Back at the Merchants' Guild, Tendar rejoined Antonio and Jingyuji. The dwarf examined the boiling cans, commenting on the clever heating method. The soldier revealed the cans contained food he hadn't yet tasted, explaining they held canned curry, typically served with white rice. Having never seen such a dish, Antonio nonetheless found its aroma appetizing, while Eldra was taken aback by its brown color. Once served, the two guild masters thoroughly enjoyed the spicy meal. The elf, however, hesitated to try the muddy-looking curry. Hesitantly, she finally took a bite, and the concerned soldier inquired about her opinion. Blushing, she stated its taste could not be described in a single word, a sight that also satisfied Joe. After this, Antonio and Tendar engaged in a lengthy discussion about what to can. The soldier deduced they could begin canning using the heat processing method, as the equipment required to create a vacuum would likely be difficult to replicate in this world. Belle then entered the room, whispering something to Antonio, explaining that the Adventurers Guild had urgently requested his presence. Concerned, the merchant adjourned the meeting and asked Jingyuji to join them on this errand to the Adventurers Guild. Once there, they were warmly greeted by Gilbert, with even Tendar having tagged along. A crowd had gathered, all fixated on a barbarian loudly confronting Albert, Gilbert's brother and the guild master of the Adventurers Guild. Turning to Joe, the barbarian called him a braggart and angrily declared there was no way he could have single-handedly taken down 3 ogres. All who had been present during the fight vouched for Joe, but the barbarian was convinced everyone was trying to deceive him. Angrily slamming his shield against the floor, he proclaimed that even he, Goliath the Ironclad, a C-rank adventurer, couldn't defeat an ogre by himself, so there was no conceivable way a young man like Joe could. Unsure if the man was being confident or timid, the soldier realized he had offended someone who outranked him. Upon Tendar's suggestion, Goliath decided to test Joe. They headed to an arena where the barbarian used his armor and sword to prop his shield against a barrel. The dwarf then proceeded to unleash a fireball at it, a display of genuine magic that left the shield utterly unscathed. The barbarian proudly boasted of his ironclad shield and its legendary ability to repel any attack. The dwarf shared his assessment of the shield and, despite his curiosity, offered Joe a way out if he chose to apologize to Goliath. The soldier, however, refused. His training kicked in. Aiming forward, his countless hours on the firing range paid off as he assumed a prone firing position and extended the rifle's bipod. He would challenge the ironclad shield himself. "What are you doing, Tendar, son?" Goliath asked, seeing the dwarf cover his ears with his hands. As it turned out, Joe had instructed him to do so before employing his explosive magic. Gripping the weapon firmly, Joe aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger, kicking up a cloud of dust around the target. When the dust receded, Goliath was left gaping, the crowd soon following suit. Spinning in place, the ironclad shield fell to the ground, completely riddled with bullet holes. The barbarian was speechless, but Tendar merely added that Joe was right that Goliath should not be the target, seeing as the projectiles had also pierced his breastplate and the barrel behind it. Huffing, Joe checked that the magazine was empty, and the crowd erupted in applause at this feat, all present now convinced of Joe's power. Goliath lamented the damage to his shield, but Tendar clapped him on the back, telling him to bring it to his workshop, though warning the repair would be expensive. The dwarf then turned to the soldier, praising his machine gun. The surprised soldier deduced that since Tendar had a watch, he could also be well informed about Kojiro's equipment. "Dwarves are cunning," Joe thought, as Tendar agreed to continue calling his rifle explosive magic in exchange for Joe's story. He was then pulled from his thoughts by Albert, who, just like his brother, proceeded to smack him on the back and pat him vigorously while praising his explosive magic. Eldra told Belle she could release her ears, and as soon as she did, the beast girl noticed an adventurer named Anne jump into the arena in a hurry, looking for the guild master. Panting, she reported a major problem near the northern village. A wyvern had appeared near her hometown. Even Joe could sense the danger in her statement. Anne confirmed a messenger had just arrived at the guild from the village with this report, before turning to Joe, desperately begging him to come to her village at once to use his explosive magic to slay the wyvern. Telling the girl to calm down, Albert turned to the crowd, instructing them to send someone to the guild immediately and requesting guards be dispatched. Tendar then explained to Joe that a wyvern was the smallest type of dragon, capable of extremely fast flight, whose scales were as hard as steel. Most troubling of all, they had a taste for people. Albert immediately began organizing a subjugation mission, enlisting all metal rankers present to take down the wyvern, as well as the leather rank magic users. Staring at his destroyed equipment, Goliath requested to borrow new gear from the guild so he could join as well. Joe apologized for destroying his shield, but the warrior admitted it was his own fault for starting the whole thing, stating he would be counting on Joe in the upcoming battle. Under Albert's command, the subjugation team formed up immediately, the adventurers reacting to the emergency with almost military discipline. The guildmaster noted that the fastest route to the northern village would be to use horses on the city road. But when Anne urged them to hurry and depart that way, he expressed caution. The sun was already setting, and even city roads harbored demons at night, making the trip dangerous, even with horses and night vision. Lacking a safe immediate route, they resolved to leave early in the morning. Anne, however, was desperate for them to act as soon as possible, clenching her fists with frustration. She recalled how her village had been attacked by a wyvern in the past, leading to her brother and friends being devoured. She refused to see that happen to anyone else again. Stepping forward, Jingyuji told Albert and Gilbert that he would go ahead to the village. To avoid encountering demons, he would make sure to run through the night faster than a horse. That's what he said, though Gilbert doubted its truth. At the city gates, Antonio told him he was looking forward to seeing what tricks the man had in store for them. Anne then appeared behind them, wearing a helmet, stating that Joe was an amazing magician who could use that kind of explosive magic and would save the village. The men inquired about her attire, to which she explained the soldier wanted her to show him the way and had lent her the helmet for the iron horse they were about to ride. "Iron horse?" Gilbert asked with incredulity. But at that precise moment, Jingyuji arrived. "I'll get there before anyone else and protect everyone in the village," he declared, astride a JSDF-approved Kawasaki KLX 250 reconnaissance motorcycle. A sentinel, armed with a spear, stood guard atop the watchtower overlooking the northern village. Peering into the night, he spotted something. "Is it a wyvern?" asked one of his comrades, but the sentinel pointed to a strange light approaching them from the city road. At ground level, Joe and Anne had arrived at Village Chief Loth's house. The soldier and his companion were briefed on the situation. 6 people had already been slain by the wyvern, with the creature only attacking at dawn. The villagers had endured sleepless nights, anxiously awaiting the monster's appearance. Noticing Anne's fear, Jingyuji patted her helmet, assuring her it would be fine, and asked the chief to provide more details about the wyvern's behavior. Standing atop the village's watchtower, Joe scanned the horizon in search of the monster, with Anne beside him. After some time, he broke the silence, suggesting they have dinner and take turns keeping watch, ensuring they would be fresh when the time came. She protested, but her growling stomach suggested otherwise. Soon, he handed her a warm tray of katsudon. In addition to his JSDF equipment, the goddess had placed Joe's personal belongings, those he had on him before he passed away, into his inventory, including the warm plate of katsudon he had just purchased. Though she had never tasted anything like it, Anne found the dish delicious. Having calmed down, she recounted her story to Joe. Her parents had died when she was very young, leaving her and her brother to live together in the village. After losing her brother, she had chosen to live as an adventurer. Her bow had belonged to her brother, and she wanted to defeat the wyvern with it as a form of closure. Leaning on Joe, she thanked him for listening, having talked a great deal, and somehow reminded of her brother, she relaxed and nodded off. She was awakened at dawn by the soldier, who alerted her as the wyvern flew towards them. Seeing the monster approach, they proceeded as planned. The wyvern soared over the town, turning its head as it heard a loud bang below. Standing in the town square, Joe waited with his rifle at the ready as the creature dove towards him. He recalled that the intelligence indicated the dragon glided in a straight line when attacking people. Aiming his rifle, he targeted the creature's wings, which were unreinforced by scales. He fired his weapon, succeeding in damaging the wings and causing the wyvern to fall to the ground. Getting up, the monster roared in pain and anger. Joe stood firm as he felt the wind buffet him, the wyvern attempting to fly, but the monster was suddenly struck in the eye by an arrow fired by Anne. Seizing the opportunity, the soldier fired a rifle grenade straight at the wyvern's head, succeeding in slaying the beast once and for all. Anne opened her eyes to see Joe standing triumphantly atop the slain beast, having missed the explosion. Members of the Adventurers Guild arrived shortly after the wyvern's defeat, having left Svenny just before sunrise, taking the shortest route there. Dwarves are selfish, Joe thought as Tendar seethed at him for slaying the monster before he arrived. Goliath stared at the slain monster when Joe approached him, offering some scales he had collected from the defeated creature so Goliath could repair his shield. The barbarian became unexpectedly happy at this, the gesture apparently having been Tendar's idea. Gilbert praised Anne for her part in the fight, stating that if his brother approved, she could be promoted to leather ranker for her deed. Joe offered to vouch for her, presenting the helmet he had lent her as an early gift, which she accepted with some embarrassment. Jingyuji returned to Svenny that evening and was invited to stay at Antonio's house in gratitude for taking down the wyvern. The soldier had stayed on guard duty every night since his reincarnation, so he was immensely grateful for being given a nice bedroom where he could finally rest. Belle then knocked on the door, informed him that the bath had been prepared for him, and led him to the bathroom. Once inside, he soaked in the large bath and meditated on his situation. This was a world where monsters existed, but apparently, JSDF equipment somehow worked. He never thought he'd be able to protect someone after he died, and wondered if a woman from his past life felt as he did when protecting someone. He was pulled from his thoughts by Belle, who arrived wearing nothing but a towel, and asked to be allowed to wash his back. He was torn between his desire to have a bunny maid attend to him and the uncomfortable feeling that this was a terrible idea. Joe remained silent as Bell washed his back, thinking he absolutely should not have allowed this. He detected a pleasant scent, and it wasn't soap. Using every ounce of self-control he still possessed, he reached backward for the towel, telling the maid he could manage it himself. Back in his bed, he mentally summed up his exciting day and fell asleep. In his dreams, the girl from his past named Homie told him he had done his best, causing tears to stream down his cheek. A few days had now passed. Joe had been staying as Antonio's guest since the Wyvern attack. Walking down the hallway, he encountered the merchant's 2 wives, polygamy being a common practice in that world and not unique to Antonio. Though surprising to the Japanese man, he and Belle exchanged an awkward greeting before moving on. This was the day they were to head to the production guild to check on the progress of the canning operation, as the busy Antonio had asked him to go and take Belle with him. At Tendar's workshop, the soldier was amazed to see the can he had given him resting next to an identical prototype. The dwarf commented on the clever sealing mechanism of the can, popping the cork of a bottle in celebration. Dwarves work fast, Joe thought, as Tendar described how they would test the can by adding food and using heat to extract air before sealing it, thereby creating the vacuum effect. Turning to face Joe, the dwarf made it clear he hadn't done all that work for free, and the soldier proceeded to give him his payment. Soon enough, Tendar crashed the reconnaissance motorcycle against the wall, still getting used to handling it. The dwarf had taken a strong liking to the vehicle, begging Joe to ride it whenever he saw it, crashing it each time, but remaining unscathed due to his species' sturdy complexion. The crashes were no big deal, as Joe could summon a new bike every day from his replenishing inventory. Anne then showed up and greeted him, having been looking for them to show them something. Happily, she pulled out her new ID, crafted from leather and a wyvern scale, revealing she had indeed been promoted to leather ranker. She had asked Tendar to make that ID for her, and the grumpy dwarf noted she hadn't paid him yet. Fearing what that might cost, she asked to pay later, and the dwarf agreed. Dwarves are wicked, Joe concluded, realizing Tendar had no intention of making her pay and was just teasing her. Belle asked Anne if she had shown her ID to the director. As Anne was just heading there, the adventurer invited the maid and Joe to accompany her. They arrived at an orphanage where both Belle and Anne had grown up, managed by the church, and met their guardian, director, and Bishop Margaret. Much to their surprise, the bishop bowed in reverence at the sight of Joe and refused to rise. The soldier insisted she get up, but she refused, her words shaking him to his core. "Welcome to this humble world, apostle of the goddess." She told him she could perceive the protection and blessing of the goddess upon him, being the first person to receive both since the hero Kajiro. She then pointed behind him, and Joe beheld a scene worthy of the cathedral of the Russian armed forces. Kajiro leading the charge against demons, riding atop a Type 89 Japanese medium tank from the Second World War, with beastmen driving other tanks behind him. Seeing this, Joe deduced that the hero had also received the inventory blessing, just like him, and noted they actually had much in common, wishing he knew more about the man. Anne and Belle were visibly nervous around Joe after discovering he was an apostle, the young Japanese man apparently exuding some intensely divine vibes. To ease the situation, he invited them to get something to eat, at his expense, to celebrate Anne's promotion. The adventurer then led them to a good place she knew, greeting the cook, Marduk, as an old acquaintance. Joe was surprised to find an okonomiyaki stall in this world, and the cook immediately recognized him as Explosive Joe, a nickname derived from his now famous explosive magic, which the soldier found embarrassing. Marduk then offered to make something special for him, whipping up an okonomiyaki pancake. Joe was surprised by this, and even more so when he saw Anne cut hers up Kansai style, wondering if this, too, had been passed on by Kajiro, with Belle noticing he was lost in thought. Just as they were about to eat, they were disturbed by someone yelling nearby. Joe turned to see a young man on the street, glaring at a much larger man towering over him. Noticing his aggressive attitude, the larger man drew his sword, disregarding his subordinate's reminder that they were in the city, and aimed it at the man on the ground, offering to forgive him if he apologized. The sergeant raised his sword, ready to strike down the blue-haired young man. Too late to give him a warning, Joe fired a warning shot in the man's direction and aimed at him with his Sig Sauer P220 sidearm, demanding he drop his sword. The mercenary glared at him, but then noticed the dent on the cobblestone next to his feet where the bullet had struck. His men recognized the young soldier as Explosive Joe, and realizing this, the sergeant gauged the situation and chose to comply, sheathing his weapon and turning to leave with his men. The blue-haired man moved to follow them, but Joe grabbed him by the wrist and asked if he was all right. Trembling, he pointed at the food in Marduk's stand and declared it smelled good as he stuffed his mouth with the okonomiyaki. Joe realized the man had been on the verge of collapsing from hunger and treated him to as much as he wanted to eat, which amazed Belle. Seeing the man devour one pancake after another, Marduk wondered how long he had been without food, with the young man revealing he had not eaten anything for 2 days. Now full, the man thanked Joe for his help, introducing himself as Locke and stating he hailed from the southern village. He promised to repay the soldier for this someday and departed. Glad that the man was feeling better, Joe wondered if the sergeant was also someone from outside Svenny and believed him to be a mercenary, having heard that mercenaries had been flowing in from the citadel of Tars, west of Svenny. Unlike Svenny, where the merchant and adventurers guilds were active, in Tars, the mercenary guild held significant power. From what Joe could discern, Locke had lunged at the sergeant, and he wondered about Locke's connection with the mercenaries. He was pulled from his thoughts by Marduk, who had decided to treat him to a veritable tower of okonomiyaki with extra meat for helping the young man, also praising his magic skill and noting the dent he had made at the mercenary's foot. As he began to eat, a new idea sparked in his mind. The next day, he paid a visit to the orphanage with the members of the Merchants' Guild, and Bishop Margaret told the children he had come to give them a gift. Right on schedule, Marduk and Tendar arrived, having prepared what he had asked for, takoyaki. Antonio was delighted by this new dish, and the dwarf eagerly devoured it, while grumbling about being asked to make a dented iron plate, though he had indeed crafted it in a single night. Marduk was also hooked on making this dish and had helped procure the ingredients at the market, using dried seaweed, mushroom, and octopus. Despite her misgivings about the horrifying appearance of those creatures, Eldra also enjoyed the dish. Margaret thanked the soldier for the rare and delicious treat, and the amazed Antonio suggested making takoyaki an exclusive business for those from the orphanage. Having discussed the matter with Joe the night before, it seemed the young people from the orphanage, like Anne, Belle, and Marduk, faced significant hardships before they could become independent. By granting the orphanage exclusivity, the market would prosper, and more jobs would be created. Joe smiled, watching the happy orphans, while Belle bashfully thanked him for looking out for the orphanage, noting he was not only strong but always helping others and was very kind. Unused to being complimented by a beautiful woman, he hurriedly replied that he did what he could and ate his takoyaki, burning himself in the process. If he could do anything to help besides using force, he would gladly do so. Nonetheless, he resolved to train with his equipment. Joe headed to the west bank of the Great River in southern Svenny, with Anne in tow, ready to try out the big guns. Checking his inventory the previous night, he was surprised to find some new equipment. Apparently, all his monster slaying had raised his rank, so the goddess had added more equipment to match it. Scanning the other bank of the river, he spotted a large boulder protruding from the cliffs and decided to test his Panzerfaust 3 anti-tank weapon against it. He fired the weapon, and the warhead flew straight to the target, shattering it to smithereens. Anne asked if he saw that boulder, and though he initially thought she referred to the target, the girl pointed out that a boulder was moving in the river. To his shock, the soldier saw 3 massive boulder giants chasing after a ship, and Anne realized that at this rate, the creatures would end up heading towards Svenny. Anne and Joe immediately returned to Svenny and reported the situation to the Adventurers Guild and the guards. As proof, he handed his smartphone, also part of his inventory, to the surprised Amanda and Albert, showing them a recording of the monsters chasing the ship. These were known as guardian golems, artifacts lying within ancient ruins due south of the city, but Goliath had never heard of them moving before now. Knowing that the monsters were heading towards the city, the guild master signaled the chief of the guards. Bells rang an alarm as the people in the city's port were evacuated within the city walls, and those capable of using long-range magic attacks and ranged weapons were positioned on the battlements to stop the incoming golems. As the portcullis slowly lowered, Joe asked Amanda for permission to intercept the arriving golems outside of the east gate, while also telling Anne to watch the golems' movements from the walls for him. As the creatures emerged from the water, the soldier took position on a rooftop overlooking the port and summoned some heavy weaponry. He observed the golems were chasing the ship from earlier, and the crew was loading something into a wagon driven by the mercenary sergeant from before. He then heard a noise, which turned out to be magical energy charging within a golem's head before it unleashed a fireball that pulverized the ship. Realizing the monsters could use attack magic, Joe jumped to battle stations and manned the M2 heavy machine gun on a tripod mount he had summoned. He unleashed a barrage of 50 BMG rounds in their direction. The bullets succeeded in smashing the rock, severing one of the golem's arms, and Joe proceeded to fire at its face to neutralize its attack magic before it could strike back, then severed its legs. Gilbert and Anne watched this from the battlements, amazed at his skill, and the girl warned him of the other two golems approaching, having caught their attention. Joe went full D-Day on the monsters as they approached, quickly neutralizing another one. The surviving creature then grabbed its fallen comrade, violently tossing it at the soldier. Joe managed to clear the roof before it landed, and standing before it, quickly summoned a Panzerfaust 3 from his inventory. Firing it from his shoulder, he blew half the monster's face off. As it fell, the creature began to fire fireballs uncontrollably from its remaining eye, causing widespread destruction in town as they landed. Suddenly, Joe saw, to his horror, that one of the fireballs was heading straight towards Anne and the other defenders standing on the battlements. Death seemed imminent when Goliath stepped before the hopeless defenders, telling them to stand back as he raised his shield and braced for the impact. His shield absorbed the full force of the fireball, and he triumphantly dispelled it with a triumphant cry. He and Tendar had arrived just in time, the dwarf having finished fixing the ironclad shield and modifying it with wyvern scales. Joe then turned to the golem and, finding it already lifeless, wondered why the monsters had pursued the ship. Amanda then appeared, running toward him, having just received a message that another golem had breached the south gate and entered the city. Compared to the others, this one was larger, jet black, and far more finely crafted than its brethren. Joe sped along the wall's battlements on his reconnaissance bike to face this new foe that he glimpsed among the buildings. Noticing it turning its head, he wondered if it was searching for something. Joe soon saw it was chasing after the wagon driven by the sergeant. The officer continued to drive like a madman, wondering how far the creature would pursue them, and Joe used his bike to close the distance with the golem. He considered summoning another Panzerfaust 3, but soon realized that using it within the city would undoubtedly cause collateral damage. As he pondered a way to stop it without harming the city, he was surprised to see the golem grind to a halt before Margaret's orphanage. In the front yard, the sergeant had taken Belle hostage while his men seized some children. Having realized the golem would not attack if they used them as a shield, he ordered his men to load the kids into the wagon, taking Belle hostage as well, and warned the creature not to move. Hearing him call the kids "stock," the monster prepared to strike the mercenary, only for a mechanical claw to strike it across the face. Having summoned a Hitachi heavy hydraulic excavator for disaster relief, the soldier went full Hell's Reach and engaged the towering golem in hand-to-hand combat. Finding they were about equal in strength, Joe fired his rifle at the golem's head but failed to inflict much damage from his poor firing position. As he aimed at its eyes, the golem suddenly crouched, ending the fight. It then began to glow, and a panel in its chest opened to reveal Locke controlling the gargantuan machine. The young man called out to Joe, who in turn asked what he was doing inside that thing. Locke attempted to say something to Joe, but soon collapsed from exhaustion. causing the golem to power down and come crashing to the ground, overturning a wagon and injuring one of the mercenaries. Several figures started running from the wagon, and the sergeant violently kicked his wounded subordinate, telling him that the slaves were running away. Joe watched in disbelief and disgust as he saw the chained children struggling to escape. One of them turned to stare at the golem, recognizing Locke as her big brother. Running in his direction, the young man called her Miranda and told her to run, but the sergeant soon caught her, causing her to trip with his sword. Realizing she was the one he was looking for, Joe understood the gravity of the situation, aiming his rifle at the man. But the sergeant told him to throw down his wand while threatening the girl. The soldier complied, tossing the rifle over to him, and the sergeant realized Locke couldn't move even if he wanted to. The blue-haired man desperately told him to get away from his sister, but the mercenary gritted his teeth, furious at him for interfering with his business all this time. He raised his sword to strike down Locke's sister before his eyes. Before he could land the strike, one of the slaves ensnared the sword's hilt with her chains, pulling the blade back and telling Miranda to run away. The sergeant then grabbed her by the hair, trying to strike her down in turn, but the sword snapped after coming into contact with a defensive barrier protecting her. Seizing the opportunity, Joe drew his sidearm and fired, disarming the sergeant and warning him not to move. Defeated, the mercenary cursed as Amanda and her guards rushed to restrain him and his men. The mercenaries that had come from the city of Tars were apparently part of a dark guild dealing in slave trafficking and would be put on trial by the Svenni Guild Council. The guards removed Locke from the golem with great care, and he was finally reunited with his sister. Fortunately, Locke's attack caused no human casualties. Though he would be put on trial, given the circumstances, Joe would help them as much as he could so the charges were reduced. Nonetheless, he was curious as to how the young man had gained the power to move the golem. Turning to the girl who had saved Miranda, Joe told her not to move and bound her wounded ankle, praising her defensive magic and thanking her for her help. Looking up, he was shocked by how much the girl resembled Homie. Joe used his iron crab excavator to remove the pieces of the destroyed southern city gate, speeding up its reconstruction. Upon the soldier's signal, Locke's golem stepped forward and placed the new door in its place. It had been a week since the attack, and as a result of the trial, Locke was sentenced to supervised probation and was required to remain in Svenni to serve the city. His lenient sentence was due to the fact he was trying to save his sister, and that he was still 18 years old. Moreover, Bishop Margaret sensed he was blessed by the goddess, which enabled him to move the golem. Miranda was surprised that he moved it without realizing it, but he explained he did it in a moment of desperation. Smiling, the bishop suggested he learn to use his power. Standing amidst the ruins of her church, it was determined that Locke would need some guidance regarding his abilities, and since Joe was chosen to be his instructor, they were working together to rebuild the city. The young man was enthusiastic at being able to help, but was still quite shy when noticing the several young women swooning over him, the people of Svenni having taken a liking to this hardworking youth. The black-haired girl named Nakin approached with some children to see the iron crab for themselves, marveling at its size. While the kids headed inside for lunch, the girl remained behind, and Joe thought again about how much she looked like Homie. Nakin then returned his neckerchief, thanking him for helping her, but the piece of cloth was blown by strong winds. He reached for her, but then clenched his fist and told himself to get a grip. There was no way she was Homie, as the girl had been killed in a terrorist attack back in his world. He was pulled from his thoughts by Belle, who told him they were ready for the viewing. Thanking her, he signaled Locke and told him they were going to check out the property. As Locke's guardian, he had decided to be independent and own a house in Svenni, and even though he had just brought up the subject to Antonio, the merchant immediately began looking up some properties that might suit him. Nakin then left, and seeing Joe staring at her, Belle asked if Nakin would like to join them. The group then headed off to see the property, finding it to be a large former inn. Locke was in high spirits, eagerly suggesting they park the golem on the front lawn, and Joe looked forward to bathing with a view from the second floor. Belle asked Nakin what she thought of the place, but the girl paused and asked if they didn't hate being with her, since she had demon blood in her, which was what had powered the magic she used earlier. Belle warmly pointed out that she was also a girl, and then stated she can't let the boys be the only ones to decide where to live. A professional maid's opinion, Joe thought, as Belle expertly assessed the house as too big and hard to manage, estimating it would require at least 3 maids to maintain, which would come at a high cost. She told Nakin that they must put their 2 opinions as well, to which she hesitantly agreed, proceeding to point out that parking the golem up front would block the sunlight, while in the northern backyard, it would bother the neighbors. With that settled, Belle took her hand, and they merrily headed off to the next house. Having gone through the girls' rejections and visited a few more properties, they eventually reached the final one on the northern edge of the city. This was a rather modest house compared to the previous properties they had seen, but it allowed them to conveniently place the golem next to the city wall so it wouldn't get in anyone's way. With only 3 rooms, a single maid should be able to maintain it. With the boys' basic requirements met, they decided to stay there. Marduk and Anne arrived to help with the moving, and soon many other people started showing up. Joe asked the adventurer about her huge luggage cart, and she explained that since she had to leave the guild dorm due to an age restriction, Antonio had told her to have him take care of her along with Locke, writing a letter of recommendation for that purpose. In exchange for the extra roommates, the merchant would provide them all with a maid. Anne was very excited to live with Belle again. Though puzzled at first, Joe realized Antonio had brought them together so they could all live in a friendly environment and take care of each other. He later heard that the house had originally belonged to Antonio and deduced that the clever merchant had deliberately shown them properties that didn't meet their requirements first. He knew Joe would be reluctant to accept the property or Belle if he offered them to him directly, and had arranged everything so it would be as smooth as possible. Since their conversation back at the Merchants Guild, Eldra took her leave, leaving Joe and Antonio alone. The merchant had arranged everything so Locke could register with the Adventurers Guild, even while on probation, noting that his power was well suited for adventurers, just as Joe had said. Nakin's case was a more difficult matter, since she hailed from the demon tribe. As a result of the last war, the world's negative perception of the demon tribe remained quite deeply rooted, so even if the girl were to be released, it would be difficult for her to stand on her own. Much to the soldier's surprise, the merchant had already worked something out about that as well. He had found a prior case of a demon tribe member registering as an adventurer and would make the necessary arrangements with Albert. With that settled, Joe headed back to his new home and offered Nakin some takoyaki, thanking her for her help in choosing it. She deduced the food was a thank you for that, but that wasn't what he meant. Cutting to the chase, he asked her if she would like to become an adventurer and form a party with him and the others. The roar of an engine echoed through the woods. Anne warned Joe that if they went too far, they'd end up in the middle of nowhere. But he was excited to begin their training and planned to head to a secluded spot to start, oblivious to the fact that his other party members were frozen in terror at riding at high speed on a vehicle for the first time. The light armored vehicle made its way through the woods until they reached a clearing, upon which Joe went full boot camp and ordered the group to dismount. Having previously handed camouflaged uniforms to the fighting members standing before them, he declared that the Svenny Adventurer Guild party, J-Tai, would conduct a field exercise. They had named themselves after the self-defense force. The previous night, he had raised his tanker to toast to the beginning of the J-Tai party, receiving only silence in return, save for Belle's clapping. For exposing the Dark Guild, their party had been accepted at the Adventurers Guild at a high rank. Joe thought everyone would be happy about it, but Anne and Nakin pointed out that this meant they would have more difficult assignments, and not everyone possessed Joe's power. He countered that everyone had their own skill, noting Anne's accuracy, Nakin's defensive magic, Locke's golem, and Belle's delicious cooking. He then explained that non-magic users, lacking good equipment and experience, could not work with a metal ranker like Joe. While Nakin explained she was seen as a failure for lacking any magic other than defensive magic. Without pausing his chewing, Locke stated he couldn't do anything besides using the golem, while Belle merely flapped her ears. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he proceeded to tell them a secret. At the clearing, Joe set up a temporary shooting range and demonstrated firing his rifle in single-shot mode, confirming his skill was not explosive magic, but instead the inherent power of the weapon itself, meaning anyone could use it. He wanted them to learn how to use these weapons to protect themselves, to prepare for the dangerous missions ahead, knowing they would use them to protect lives. Starting with Anne, he trained her on how to aim and operate her rifle, and though her first shot missed, she was surprised at having actually fired it. He then explained the inner workings of the gun to her, warning her to use it with care to prevent accidents. She then succeeded in hitting the target in burst mode all 3 times, and he moved on to Nakin. The half-demon managed to hit the target once, freezing, surprised at using attack magic. Then it was Locke's turn with the rifle. He also taught Belle to shoot the pistol for self-defense, making a mental note to make earplugs for her next time. Having used all the ammunition and recovered all the casings, they took a break to have a meal. Joe brought Tendar's canned food for them to try, and Nakin reacted to the containers just like anyone else, unconvinced at first. But after finding the food delicious, she followed suit. Anne asked about her performance, and though he merely replied that she did really well, he was actually deeply impressed by her extraordinary marksmanship and perfect eyesight. Joe's thoughts were cut short by Belle's scream, and they all turned to see a tiny slime on the ground. Anne then suggested they do some slime hunting to earn some extra income for Jai, since the magical crystals at their core were valuable. Locke and Nakin cornered the slimes, leading them into Anne's line of fire, and she proceeded to expertly shoot them, damaging their crystals with a single shot. As Belle gave them the all-clear, the group collected the crystals and amassed a neat pile. Upon the maid's suggestion, Anne rinsed the crystals with water to neutralize the corrosive properties of the slime. The adventurer was excited after getting that many crystals and was surprised when Joe gave her and the team bottles of a copyright-free major brand soft drink. After they were done enjoying the drink, Joe decided to call it a day and head back to town. But before boarding the vehicle, Anne hurried off, chasing after a huge slime, not hearing the soldier's warnings not to act on her own. Nakin ran after her to stop her. The adventurer chased the slime, unaware of her surroundings, until the creature emerged into a much larger slime that towered over her. Nakin arrived in the nick of time, raising a defensive barrier around them as the slime engulfed them. Joe then appeared, noticing his rifle dissolving within the monster. Firing his own weapon in an attempt to free his comrades, but he desisted as he noticed the girls could feel the impact of the bullets, and the rifle was not powerful enough. Anne wondered how long the barrier would last, but Nakin warned her not to talk so she could focus on maintaining the barrier. Joe then resorted to extracting them with the iron crab's claw, hoping he could get them out before it melted. Just as he secured the barrier, the slime attempted to draw the entire machine inside, but he switched to reverse and stepped on the gas, successfully extracting the 2 girls. He then turned back to the slime and reached for the crystal core with the claw, succeeding in shattering it just before the machine began to melt. Anne apologized for her recklessness and then presented the huge crystal to him. Belle appraised the jewel, and Locke identified it as a rare treasure possessing healing magic. Belle noted that Margaret from the orphanage was well versed in healing magic, and Joe suggested donating the crystal and the profits from the slime hunt to the church, much to Anne's dismay. Joe then told everyone to prepare to leave while he stored the heavy machinery back in his inventory, but he failed to notice a smaller slime lurking on the vehicle's roof, pouncing at him. Seeing the threat, Locke pushed the soldier out of the way, receiving the attack in his stead. Margaret was praying at the altar to the goddess when Joe arrived with a wounded Locke, begging for help. The adventurer's back was melted by the slime when protecting Joe, leaving him with severe burns and skin loss and feeling cold as his sister Miranda watched helplessly. Realizing that the first aid kit wouldn't suffice, he asked Margaret to use healing magic, wondering if the treasure they had collected might help. Though the nun confirmed this could be done, she could not draw the power of the treasure, as that would require a corresponding magic power, something quite scarce in Svenny. In agony, Locke began to say his farewells to his distraught sister, only for the treasure to begin shining. Margaret realized the jewel was resonating with Miranda, sensing that the goddess had just bestowed upon her the blessing of a great healing power. Taking advantage of this deus ex machina, the nun instructed her on how to channel this power, and Miranda succeeded in healing her brother's back. Joe then retold this story to a noble girl, explaining that both siblings had to spend a few weeks recuperating from the ordeal. He then gestured towards the approaching pair, seeing them running cheerfully down the street while enjoying some food, much to the girl's relief. She burst into tears of relief at this, her bodyguard Saunders handing her a handkerchief, and she thanked him for the story, apparently having ventured downtown specifically to hear it. Saunders noted it was a bad idea to invite her, observing the attention her carriage was drawing, but the blushing noblewoman countered she was having a good time. She was Elizabeth, daughter of a noble family from the citadel of Tars. She had approached him that morning at Antonio's house when her father, Lord Bunker, arrived for a business meeting. Apparently, Joe had become a topic amongst nobility, and the clueless soldier had accepted her offer to discuss it over tea, inviting the rest as well, not even noticing her blushing. Anne worriedly told Belle that Joe seemed unaware the girl might actually be there to propose to him, but Belle only noted that Joe already thought of Jay-Tai as his family. Marduk then approached him, revealing he had succeeded in recreating Thai noodle and offering him a taste. The concept of noodle soup didn't exist in this world, so he had thought of recreating something like it since he loved Southeast Asian food. Marduk then offered Elizabeth some noodle soup, but both she and Saunders were clueless as to how to eat it. They noticed with some disgust that Joe and Locke slurped the food loudly, with the guard shielding his lady from incoming splashes and soiling his white mantle. He became enraged by this, but Elizabeth accepted this to be a way commoners ate their food and was determined to slurp it elegantly. She then proceeded to do just that, trying to avoid slurping and splashing through the masterful use of her chopsticks, consuming it without a single stain on her dress, only for Locke to accidentally soil it. Tendar then arrived, grumpily telling Joe to lend him his ears and informing him of a coup that had just taken place in the citadel of Tars. Saunders stood on the battlements of the Adventurers Guild when Goliath arrived, asking about his mistress. Elizabeth had calmed down, but her mother and brothers were still in the mansion. And though the knight was frustrated, the barbarian told him to believe in Joe and Jay-Tai as the party sped towards Tars on the Lav. Joe asked Nakin for a map of Tars while reminding them all of their current assignment. Back at the Svenny Emergency Assembly meeting, it was revealed that Gilbert had informed them of the coup, which was led by the Mercenary Guild while Lord Bunker was absent. Looting and pillaging the town while the Lord's forces attempted to hold out and protect the citizens, the Assembly unanimously agreed to condemn the takeover and send reinforcements for the anti-coup forces. At the Svenny Allied Forces Guild headquarters, Albert briefed the adventurers on the plans of the city and citadel of Tars, provided by Lord Bunker, explaining that fighting was still ongoing inside the citadel, and they must quickly establish a communications line with them. He assigned Jay-Tai to the scouting mission, and the soldier declared that he had something to investigate within the city, also handing them a broadband radio so they could keep in touch. Before they departed, Antonio revealed to Joe that the carrier pigeon from Tars was actually sent by his daughter, Marianne, personally requesting that he save his daughter. On the road, Joe told the team they would head to Marianne's house, meet up with Gilbert, and pass the information to other units before evacuating the civilians and withdrawing. Belle was accustomed to driving on these vehicles, while Anne was still adjusting, and Miranda was not used to it at all and was beginning to feel carsick. Back at the city, Locke yelled at his sister to follow Joe's instructions closely, and Nakin realized his concern stemmed from knowing the way the mercenaries conducted themselves. She offered Miranda the chance to back out, but the girl was adamant on going, determined to do her best to help anyone who might be going through the same hell she had endured. Nakin coldly accepted this, and Belle eased the tension by opening a box containing rice crackers, stating that they shared the same feeling of wanting to protect someone. She suggested having a welcome party with snacks and soft drinks to welcome Miranda to Isekai'd, which she tearfully accepted. Belle offered a drink to Nakin, and though she turned it down, she nonetheless accepted the crackers. The group then drove through the night, and while those in the back seat rested, Jo asked Nakin if she liked it. She explained that it had a bit of a nostalgic taste, as it resembled a snack her late mother used to make. The soldier empathized with this, sharing the same feeling when getting a taste of home from comfort food. She then asked him if she reminded him of someone, having noticed he felt relieved and sad when seeing her. He confirmed she reminded him of a person who meant a lot to him and was now gone, wishing he could have protected her, and apologized for looking at her strangely. She then declared that they cannot bring back what we lost, and they must do their best to help Marianne, offering some crackers as they continued driving. Later that night, they arrived at the outskirts of Tars. Anne could only see the guards on the walls and wondered what Jo would do to discover what was happening inside. Just as Jo signaled up, they all stared in awe at his drone overhead, with the adventurer calling it a ferry. At Marianne's mansion, a maid asked Gilbert if help would truly arrive, with the swordsman expressing confidence in Isekai'd and explosive Jo. Suddenly, the soldier's drone appeared next to the window, and Jo communicated with them through a handy radio attached to it. Gilbert used the radio to explain the current situation of Tars and Marianne's family, and Jo then laid down a plan to be executed at dawn. Having copied what was just shared, Nakin gathered the team, and they joined up to revisit the rescue plan. Their original plan, with minimal engagement, was no longer possible since Marianne's child had a high fever, making it necessary to storm the castle wall head-on, getting there as fast as possible so Miranda could heal the infant. Anne worried about going through the castle wall, fearing collateral damage to the townspeople from the assault, but Nakin coldly stated that there was no one with Jo, slamming his fist on the vehicle's hood as he revealed that the captives had been executed on the battlements. Some guards spent their time gambling with their newly acquired loot when they heard buzzing noises in the forest. They initially mistook the incoming fireballs for shooting stars, only for them to begin raining down on the city and wreaking havoc. Having succeeded in blowing up the gate, Jo ordered his force to cease fire, and the party made its way to the citadel atop a Type 96 wheeled APC and a Type 16 maneuver combat vehicle. They sped down the main street, making a beeline towards Marianne's house, the vehicles being impervious to the fire magic and arrows fired by the mercenaries. Wanting them to lose their will to fight before the rescue, he ordered Belle to load the grenades and swing the main gun to the rear. Just as a mercenary was preparing to drop a tower on the vehicle, Anne fired the gun and blasted him out of existence. Jo urged it to charge through the crumbling tower, determined to save everyone. Meanwhile, Marianne refused to rest or let go of her baby, and Gilbert tried to hail Jo to no avail until he came charging through the wall just in time. The swordsman and the women then exited the house as Jo ordered his team to receive the rescued, introducing himself to Marianne and leading them to the APC in perfect order. Seeing him atop a building, two figures wondered if Jo was the second coming of the hero. Jo ordered Nakin to guide people to the APC, but the maid stepped before her mistress, demanding to know why there was a demon there. The moment was interrupted by the mercenaries' mages throwing fireballs at them, and Jo urged them to hurry up. Miranda approached the frozen Nakin, and the half-demon told her to guide the people to the Type 96 and headed to the driver's position to depart. The convoy got underway under heavy fire, and they violently changed course to avoid the mages. Desperately trying to find a way out, the mercenaries' morale had not dropped even after being shown the difference in strength, and they had adapted by dropping buildings on them. Wondering how they were communicating so fast, Jo asked Gilbert what the mercenaries' chain of command was, but the man didn't know, having been in the midst of investigating the Dark Guild when the coup started. It was probably instigated by them, but there wasn't an obvious connection, even following the money trail. They then sensed the presence of people with special powers, with the maid concluding it must be demons, and asking how they would dare do something like that. Marianne stared at Nakin, later turning her gaze as the demon looked down with sorrow. She then felt someone inviting her to party with them, but she brushed it off, declaring to the passengers that Jae-tae would protect them and telling Joe she had a plan to escape. The mages saw the convoy appear and were surprised when they split up, targeting the combat vehicle since it was easier to see than the blacked-out APC. Marianne asked Joe to serve as a diversion while she drove at night, using her demon eyes to see through the darkness and reach the exit. They eventually rendezvoused with Joe at the outskirts, having shaken off their pursuers, and Nakin dismounted and opened the APC's rear hatch so Miranda could start the treatment. The maid thought they should head to a hospital, but was surprised to see Miranda's magic at work. Nakin smiled as she saw the baby recover and was stunned when Marianne thanked her for what she had done. Suddenly, the maid ran some distance and fell to her knees, holding her crumbling face with her hands as it crumbled under the effect of the recovery magic, revealing her to be a demon. Seeing her horns and claws, Nakin recognized the maid as a member of the devil tribe. Still processing the situation, Joe warned Anne to be prepared, while Nakin noted that she believed the devils to have died out in the old demon war, surprised to see they yet lived. Gilbert stepped forward to deal with her and realized the Dark Guild was run by devils using skin from slain people to hide their identity. The maid confirmed this, chewing on her face like it was jerky, and Marianne realized she had eaten the real maid. The creature revealed it had swapped places with the maid when she saw Gilbert send a pigeon calling for aid, being interested in seeing Jingyuji from Jae-tae. She thanked him for the opportunity, but Nakin warned him not to get pulled into her provocation. Drawing his sidearm, Joe asked what she wanted from him, and she noted the interesting magic tools he had, declaring him to be a reincarnated person sent by the goddess, wondering if they knew about Kajiro. He asked what she would do if he were indeed reincarnated. The maid then suggested that the goddess was deceiving him and using him for her own designs, revealing that the demons were gathering reincarnated people to revive the Demon King and rule the world as comrades. She then offered him to join them and take back what was stolen from him, but he remained steadfast and refused. He could not get back what he had lost and wanted to protect the people of the world of his own free will. Still chewing, the demon regretted this, and suddenly the earth rumbled beneath them as a mass of worms emerged from the ground, heading for the baby. The demon then unfolded its wings, revealing the worm to actually be its lower section as it took flight with the crying baby. She warned Joe that it would slay the infant if he moved or if the cannon was aimed for her, planning on leaving and consuming the baby afterwards. Suddenly, the demon was shot in the head and tail, and Nakin managed to catch the falling baby just in time as the creature fell nearby. Joe looked up to see Anne perched atop a tree, having been on overwatch duty since before the treatment began. Joe aimed his pistol at the demon, who regretted not eating the baby before its flesh began to melt and slew off its bones, turning the ground black and unleashing a noxious gas. Nakin warned Joe to hold his breath and keep his distance, explaining that demons release a curse when they die. She told him they needed to clean up the corpse quickly, since if not, it would infect the land and eventually come back to life. Ordering Miranda to hit it with recovery magic, the demon's curse continued to spread as the black aura seeped into the land, spelling the end for all living creatures that came into contact with it. Miranda was barely able to contain it with her recovery magic and would not hold out for long. Joe strove to find a solution, knowing they would be wiped out by the curse if he didn't act. He considered using explosives, but knew that the contamination would spread if even a single bit of the corpse remained. Gilbert then asked if he could not summon some magic tool to clean up the curse, and as he wondered if there would be anything useful in his storage, a realization hit him. Telling Miranda to step back, he approached the demon skeleton and, holding his breath, proceeded to store it within his inventory as the others watched in awe. Once the corpse was fully stored, Joe finally breathed again, having confirmed his theory. Back in the house, Belle had asked him to help dispose of a rat she had caught in the kitchen. The soldier was reluctant to waste lives in vain, but knew it would be difficult to carry the rodent through the city to release it into the forest. He had considered carrying it in his inventory since items there should not interfere with each other. But when he tried storing it, all he managed to absorb was the cage containing it, while the mice ran off. He realized that living things could not be stored, which would prevent him from transporting people or VIPs, but had the hunch that corpses can be stored like regular items, which was finally proven to be correct. While Gilbert patted him enthusiastically, Nacken thought that with Joe, they could fight the devils. Belle then approached them, reporting that she had received a communication from the Sveni Allied forces, and surprised by the unscheduled call, Joe asked Locke if there was any problem. Before the young man could reply, Antonio snatched the radio from his hands, insisting on talking, and apparently having tagged along in the golem. Having heard they had left Tars, the merchant was relieved when his daughter Marianne told him that everyone, including her child, was safe, and he heard the child crying over the radio. Locke then reported that they had joined up with the troops that arrived later after completing their scouting mission. Soon enough, Locke's golem came into view of the returning J-Tai party on their Type 16 MCV, and Anne reported that once they joined up, they could prepare for the night shift. Joe's mind was elsewhere, however, unable to shake the demon's revelation of the existence of other reincarnated people in this world. Being fully aware of the possibility that some of them may have already joined the Demon Lord's army, he wondered if Kajiro had also received an invitation from the Demon Lord, but was snapped out of his thoughts by Anne, who frantically told him to stop the vehicle. He hit its brakes, narrowly avoiding running over some civilians, and wondered what was happening. Apparently, the Allied forces had encountered refugees from Tars before joining up with them and were providing them with food and medical aid. Once they disembarked, Marianne and her husband were immediately recognized by some of the refugees, and the girl told them about the rescue operation and what had happened with the coup. The refugees were horrified to learn that their city had been occupied by the Demon King's army, having thought they were a thing of the past. They asked about Lady Elizabeth and the rest of the Bunker family, not forgiving themselves for fleeing and leaving the Grand Duke and the Marquis behind. Seeing them crying, Joe realized that the Bunker family seemed to be beloved by its subjects. Gilbert reassured them, revealing that Bunker Castle was still held by the Loyalist forces and promising that the Allied forces and J-Tai would rescue the Grand Duke. The crowd became agitated at the mention of J-Tai, wondering if Exploding Joe was with them, and when Marianne shyly confirmed this, they erupted into cheers, begging the soldier to save the Grand Duke and reclaim the city from the Dark Guild, since they could not do it themselves. Belle then noticed a small girl amidst the crowd, and placing her hand on her shoulder, she reassured everyone that Elizabeth and the Marquis had already taken refuge in Sveni, and the lady was a good friend of J-Tai, so they would protect their friends and their families. She turned to Joe for confirmation, and faced with the child, he obviously agreed, blushing. The girl whispered something in Belle's ear, which she confirmed before whispering to Joe that the girl noted he looked like the hero Kajiro from the fairy tales. Adjusting his helmet, he noted that he was not anything like a hero, but Kajiro was surely thinking the same thing as he was. In the occupied city of Tars, Dark Guild members consulted Lord Init about what they should do to prepare for the impending arrival of J-Tai and the magician Jingyuji-jo, while two ninjas looked on from above. The robed guild members wondered if they should report it to Mr. Curtis and call for reinforcements, but their conversation was cut short by a strange sound coming from outside. Peering through the window, they saw Joe addressing them with a megaphone, surrounded by the Sveni Allied forces, promising them their safety if they surrendered quietly. A guild member dragging a slave child around in chains panicked, frantically wanting to contact Mr. Curtis, but his peer remained certain they could handle it on their own and must not show weakness, since it would not benefit them when the Demon King arrives. One of the ninjas was surprised at how they would be obsessed with their own profit, even now, but the guild member nonetheless insisted on acting and ordered the ninjas to take out Joe with their own hands. Though they remained silent at first, the ninjas proceeded to explain their plan. Not even a day since J-Tai arrived, the situation had changed drastically, and the besiegers had now become the besieged. They planned to take advantage of the situation, by using the tower's only entrance to take their revenge as the Allied forces came in one by one, waiting for Joe to attempt an assault to take him out, knowing that despite his magic tools, he was physically no different from other humans. The guild member doubted that Joe would come, but they were certain that he would come to deal with them himself after what they had done to the people of Tars. They had observed him during the rescue operation, noting that he was the type of man who would jump into danger himself to prevent others from getting hurt. The Dark Guild members agreed to this, but when the one holding the chain yanked it and began to threaten them, they proceeded to break it with a kunai, reminding them of their capabilities. They then dismissively told the robed men to mind the slaves, since without hostages, Joe would just blast the tower away with his vehicle. Outside, many of the mercenaries had willingly surrendered and laid down their arms, but there was no one important from the Dark Guild among them. Joe was complimenting an assault on the tower when a man in elaborate plate armor addressed him, introducing himself as the Lord of Tars and commander of its forces, Fairway Bunker. The man proceeded to jump up onto the vehicle and down its hatch alongside Joe. He apologized for the intrusion, asking to speak privately and noting that there were spies everywhere that had caused them a lot of problems. Having been briefed on the encounter with the devil wearing human skin, a concerned Lord Bunker noted that in this coup, there were more threats than just devils. Enemies were moving unseen in the dark, and according to the soldiers, there were rumors that the Dark Guild had ninjas associated with them. Joe was surprised to learn that this world had ninjas, and when Lord Bunker feared that they do not stand a chance against them, for they were rumored to have been modeled after an assassin group from the hero Kajiro's hometown, he found it hard to believe that someone connected to the hero would be on the side of the Dark Guild. As the Lord asked him to help infiltrate the tower with his power, Joe remembered the demon's revelation that they were gathering reincarnated people. Noticing his absent-mindedness, Fairway misinterpreted it as suspicion that he might be a devil in disguise, and he proceeded to slash his own cheek with a dagger to prove that the only thing beneath his skin was his own blood and flesh. The slaves being held in the tower included the children of Tars, and Lord Bunker did not want to delay action any further. Sheathing his now bloody dagger, he asked Joe to help save his city and people once again, leaving him no option but to humbly agree. Soon enough, Jai and the Sveni allied forces were assembled outside the tower. Joe warned those defending it about the impending assault, telling them to lay down their weapons and open the gates, while a ninja perched atop a flagpole waited for him to pass through the gate and into their trap. Some of the mercenaries considered taking Joe's offer, but others refused outright, fearing repercussion for the atrocities they had committed, and chose to fire first. An arrow hit the Type 16 MCV, bouncing harmlessly off its arm, and the vehicle returned fire with its main gun, the shell destroying the flagpole on which the ninja had been perched and causing some debris to hit her in the head. As Bell confirmed the destruction of the castle gate, Joe and Nakin sped on their bike to perform a lightning strike and rush the tower. Archers and mages prepared to shoot at them, but Nakin raised a barrier, deflecting all incoming attacks, allowing them to approach the breach. Along the way, Joe noticed a woman's hand sticking out from under a pile of debris and immediately dismounted from his bike, fearing that they may have missed a hostage during recon. He approached her without listening to Nakin's warning not to leave the protection of her defensive magic barrier, and once he reached the woman, he realized she was wearing a ninja outfit, despite looking like a normal girl. At that moment, he was shot through the arm by one of the archers on the tower's battlements. The archer reached for another arrow, but was dissuaded by a warning shot from Nakin, who urged Miranda to quickly tend to Joe. Once she removed the arrow, he signaled her to treat the ninja instead, but she then woke up briefly and whispered something in his ear before collapsing once more. As an alarmed Nakin approached, asking what had happened, Joe suddenly handed the ninja over to Miranda and rushed through the tower gate. He told the half-demon girl to continue the operation and rush the tower, and she urged him to wait so she could back him up with her defensive magic. Miranda asked about his injury, but the conversation was cut short when Locke dropped a Type 96 APC right behind her, telling her to load up those in need of evacuation, reminding her that they were still on a mission. She protested, however, pointing out that Joe said they were to continue with the operation and that Jae-tae followed his orders. At that moment, the ninja began to regain consciousness. Inside the tower, one of the darker guild members called his peer over so they could talk without the ninja reading their lips, asking what they should do about them. Though his comrade pointed out that one of them was outside dealing with Jae-tae, he was more concerned with what came next and could not afford to perish before meeting with Mr. Curtis. The guild member then reassured him and gestured towards their boss, who was gleefully using magic to torture a woman chained to the wall, and even the ninja was seemingly unable to do anything about it. He pointed out that the hostages would not be able to break free even if they cut it off. The doubtful member asked if the ninjas weren't abandoning their friends who were being held hostage, but a demon emerged from the darkness to correct him. Munching on an arm, she noted that, as long as they have the hostages, they can threaten the ninjas. Snapping out of her comatose state, the slave they had been holding screamed and attempted to run away, only for the demon's worm-like body to catch her by the head and begin to swallow her whole. The two guild members quarreled among themselves, and while the boss left, the other one was left chained to the devoured prisoner. After the demon released him, he reasoned that if the ninjas were already cutting their friends off, they might take advantage of the situation to attack the boss, but later pointed out that even if that were to happen, it would not change anything, noting that Joe's demise is near. He warned his comrade to be ready to escape, and they considered getting rid of the hostages using the ninjas and still make a profit. Their plan was cut short when Joe suddenly appeared, kicking their boss right in the face, with Nakan also taking out another guild member. The boss was surprised that they managed to make it up the stairs, but the soldier warned him not to underestimate the strength of the JSDF personnel. While Nakan could keep up thanks to Joe's training, he was actually asking how they managed to defeat the ninja, but Joe merely replied that she was not their enemy, having heard her plea for help earlier. The chained woman heard Joe and recognized his voice, but soon writhed in pain as the last remaining guild member told him to freeze while activating his magic seal. It was still not over yet. The Dark Guild member ordered the remaining ninja to slay Joe. Earlier, after Lord Init was done torturing her, Lady Sakura had communicated telepathically with the ninjas and asked them what they knew about Joe. Lowering their scarves, they reported that Jae-tae had started making their way to the tower, and he was the kind of man who would come to the rescue, just as she said. The dark-haired ninja wondered why she wouldn't let them take out the Dark Clan, pointing out they didn't need Jae-tae to deal with a single person such as Init, but Sakura replied that this tactic is also meant to get to them, warning them not to fall for it. She told them that the Dark Guild and the demons cannot resist playing with people's hearts, and even if they were to take one out, there would always be backup lurking in the shadows. Telling them not to panic, she insisted the opportunity would come once Jae-tae arrived. That time was now. The remaining Dark Guild member tried to make the ninja comply, threatening to end Sakura, but Joe warned him to release her and surrender, offering to guarantee his safety if he did. The man warned him not to be stupid, but Joe pointed out there was no other option for him than to surrender. "It's a shame how disappointing," was Joe's reaction when the man faltered, but then insisted on keeping his seal active. Having received the code words through Joe's wireless earphones, someone outside confirmed the beginning of a military operation. The entire tower trembled as Locke's golem climbed its outer shell, and a large hand with rope coiled around them appeared through the window and leveled to reveal Anne strapped to it, aiming at the guild member with her weapon. She took the shot, successfully destroying the seal, and while Joe declared the operation over and signaled Miranda to come in and tend to the wounded, the ninja took the opportunity to leap in for the kill. Before she could deliver the blow, he told her not to kill him, causing both the ninja and his would-be victim to ask why he would spare him. Joe told her to take him to trial, noting that the mission of Jae-tae was only to reclaim the city of Tars, and that what would happen to the town and the people needs resolution. The guild member believed this was all just a lie and he would be tortured later, so Joe asked him if that was the reason he did not trust others and if all his friends thought that way. Sakura smiled at this, having confirmed that Joe was just like the other person she had met before. Blacking out, she woke up sometime later only to find herself in a bed at an unknown location in the city. Using her heightened sense of hearing, she could sense that she was in a palace where an evening dinner party was being held in celebration of Tai's triumph, and the guests were feasting on alcohol and exquisite food. The door to her room opened, and Belle entered with a tray of food and the two ninjas standing behind her. As they rushed to embrace her, she asked why they were dressed like maids, prompting them to reveal with some embarrassment it was Joe's suggestion that all ninjas dress up in maid clothes. Suspecting some lewd ulterior motive, Sakura was somewhat disappointed at finding out that he was that type of person. But Belle was quick to clarify that Joe had consulted the issue with Grand Duke Fairway. They both agreed that the ninjas would be disguised as maids who had been held hostage, since otherwise it would prove difficult for the people of Tars to accept their former enemies. As the bunny maid uncovered Sakura's meals, the ninjas urged her to drink it, praising its flavor and nutritional value, so she thanked them and asked that they call Joe later, since they had something to talk about. Meanwhile, our hero was refusing the treasures being offered by Grand Duke Fairway in gratitude for saving their city. Anne asked why he would refuse such gifts, wishing to get rich without paying the tax, and paying no mind to the fact that the Adventurers Guild would compensate them for their deeds. Approaching one specific item, Joe asked if he could have it, and Fairway immediately agreed, despite his butler's protests that it was a Bunker family heirloom, noting that Joe was the one who deserved to have it. The item in question was actually a paper crane kept inside a crystal vase, as Lord Bunker explained it was a gift left behind by the hero, Sir Kajiro, at the conclusion of the last war against the Demon King.